They say the strongest prisons are the ones without walls, the ones you learn to love. In a forgotten place, a man woke up surrounded by peace, and yet starved for meaning. What he found there changed everything. They say hell is chaos, but sometimes hell is too quiet, a place where nothing burns and nothing breathes, where comfort isn't a gift, but a trap with velvet walls. But for some men, hell is comfort, predictable, painless, soft. Welcome to the town of small things, where nothing is broken but nothing grows, where men stop moving not because they can't, but because they forget how. This isn't just a story, this is a mirror, and if you watch until the end, you'll understand the quiet power that separates those who rise from those who rot. No one knew when the town was built. It wasn't on any map, nor spoken of in nearby cities, but it existed, tucked between soft hills and a sky that rarely changed. The sun always rose the same way. The wind followed a quiet pattern. Even the birds sang the same song each morning, as if rehearsed by something older than time. People in the town smiled. They worked. They returned home. They rested. Each face bore the calm expression of a life without friction. But beneath the surface, something ached. A stillness that wasn't peace. A quiet that wasn't silence. It was a kind of stagnation, so subtle it could only be felt, not named. He woke up there one day, the young man. He didn't remember arriving. He didn't know how long he'd been in the town. Time here had melted into one long looping hour. He asked questions. Why does nothing change? People smiled. Why do we all follow the same steps again and again? They laughed kindly, as if he had told a joke, but no one answered. So he tried to leave. The first day, he walked until the sun dipped low, the horizon stained in gold and silence. But as night settled in, he found himself back in front of the same fountain, as if the town had folded in on itself, hiding the exits like a house that didn't want to be left. In the town square, he ran the next day, faster, further, same result. The edges of the town seemed to curve inward, folding back onto itself like a maze drawn by a dreaming god. He shouted, threw stones, broke windows. Still, nothing changed. Each morning, the town was reset, cracks gone, dust swept, the people smiling. He began to despair. For weeks, or perhaps years, he wandered through the same routines with the others, unsure if he was any different from them anymore. Time had no grip on this place, only repetition. But then, one morning, a flicker of something different. He wandered further than before, to the outskirts, beyond the homes and shops, to the fields where wild things grew. And there, beneath a crooked tree, he saw him, an old man, laying a single brick into the earth. The young man approached, eyes burning with confusion and cynicism. "You've been here as long as I have, maybe longer, and that's all you've done?" The old man didn't look up. He pressed the brick into the soil with care, aligning it with those before it. The young man laughed bitterly. 10 years and you've built what? A wall. Now the old man looked at him. His eyes were like still water, deep, unmoved. "And you," he said softly without lifting his gaze, "have run 100 miles, but haven't moved an inch." His hands remained steady on the brick, but the weight of his words hit like thunder in an empty valley. That moment, it cut deeper than any argument. The young man said nothing. The old man returned to his work. One brick, then another. Always one per day, no more. The next morning the young man came back. He watched, waited. The old man laid another brick. No rush, no speeches, just action. The young man began to follow, not because he understood, but because he had nothing left. He copied the motion, dug, placed, pressed, day after day. At first it felt meaningless. One brick? What could one brick do? But slowly his hands hardened, his mind quieted, his mornings gained gravity. He began rising with purpose, not to escape, but to begin. He walked differently, ate slower, noticed things, the way dew formed on petals, the way silence echoed at dawn. He wrote one sentence a day, read one page, walked one path, then another, and though no one else seemed to change, he began to feel like he was shedding old skin. But what mattered most wasn't what he did, it was what he stopped chasing. He stopped checking the edge of town. He stopped watching the sky for signs. He stopped looking for shortcuts. And in that stillness, something began to shift. The townspeople noticed. Some mocked him, others asked questions. A few followed him, briefly, before falling back into old patterns. That was fine. He no longer craved attention. He began repairing the broken door to his home. He lit candles at sunrise and sat in silence. He trained his body with slow, deliberate movement. The wall grew, not just in the field, but in him. A structure formed inside, a kind of spine that hadn't existed before. One day he caught his own reflection in a basin of water. For the first time he saw a man he respected. He no longer chased the exit. He no longer feared the cycle. He had become solid. And here's what most men miss. Change doesn't come when you force it. Change comes when you build a container strong enough to hold it. Discipline isn't fire. It's stone. It's dust. It's the cold ache of doing the same thing when no one's watching. It's brick. It's mortar. It's repetition. It's silence that echoes with purpose. One morning he laid his brick, and the wind changed. He looked up and saw it. The gate at the edge of town. The same path, the same hills, but the air felt different. He stepped forward, and there it was. The gate. Always there. Always open. No guards, no signs. Just a quiet passage framed by ivy and sky. It hadn't been locked. It had only been waiting for a man who had become solid enough to see it. He walked forward. The town did not stop him. The people did not turn. As he crossed the threshold, he turned back once. The wall he had built was not a prison. It was a road. He whispered something only the wind could hear. I was never stuck. I was undisciplined. And if you're still watching, here's the truth. Your life won't change in a single moment, but it will change daily if you dare to become the man who lays one brick when no one is watching. Now, in another town, beyond other hills, he lays a brick each morning. Others come. Some stay, some leave. He tells them little, only this: the man who waits for change will wait forever. The man who becomes change walks free. And if you ever find yourself in a place where every day feels the same, listen carefully. You might hear the sound of stone against earth, a wall being built, a life being shaped, and a gate slowly opening. Welcome to the Marble Sage. Welcome to the town of small things. But before the town, there was another life, one filled with movement, but no meaning, noise, but no music. He had once lived in a city where ambition was currency, where every man shouted to be seen, where the tallest buildings were made of glass and ego. He remembered it faintly. The pace, the hunger, the sense that if you weren't growing faster, you were failing. He had tried all of it. The morning routines, the 10-year plans, the midnight hustle, but still, something was missing. And slowly, he burned out. Not in flames, but in silence. He remembered the night he collapsed, not on a stage, not at a climax, but alone, in a bathroom stall, staring at himself through a cracked mirror. He had forgotten who he was, not because of loss, but because of noise. That was the last night he remembered, before the town. And now, years later, as the fire crackled beside him, and the young builders laid their bricks with calloused hands, he understood that collapse was a beginning, because some men aren't destroyed by failure. They're freed by it, freed to become quiet, freed to build, freed to disappear from the crowd and reappear in discipline. And so he thanked the mirror, the crack, the moment when ambition broke and identity began. But not all men who stumble find their footing. In those same hills, not far from the wall, there once came another, a man who refused the brick. He had wandered into the valley like so many others, tired, frustrated, hungry for change. At first he followed, watched, even laid a few bricks, but his hands were quick, his eyes restless. This is too slow, he muttered one day. There must be a better way. He left, disappeared for months, returned with new tools, shiny and sharp. He carved fast, loud, built something tall in days. A tower, not a wall. At first it was admired. Travelers came to see it. The man stood proud. But the wind came, the seasons changed, and the tower cracked, because what is built for attention cannot survive in silence. He tried to fix it, patch it, reinforce it, but the foundation was thin. One morning, the tower fell. The man, broken, returned to the edge of the wall, to the quiet builders, to the boy now grown. He held out his hands. I was wrong. The boy gave him a brick and said nothing, because truth doesn't need to be explained. It only needs to be lived. And so the man, older now, humbler, began again, not because it was easy, but because it was real. But even beyond the gate, the test wasn't over. The world outside was not a paradise. It was wild, raw, honest. There were no signs, No maps, just terrain, and himself. For the first time in his life, he had to lead without being led. No town to repeat him, no pattern to follow, just tools and truth. And some days, the weight of his freedom crushed him more than the cage ever did. He missed the stillness, he missed the smiles, he missed the soft lie that everything was fine. But he remembered the brick, he remembered the silence, he remembered the man he used to be, and the man he refused to return to. So he built again, not with blueprints or applause, but with stillness, with small rituals no one would ever see. He planted trees without knowing if he'd live to see their shade. He carved paths into the hills not to lead others, but to lose himself and find what remained. He built rituals into the wild. He rose before the sun. He chopped wood for no reason other than strength. He sat in silence long enough to hear the chaos within him dissolve. He didn't speak often, but when he did, people leaned in, not because his voice was loud, but because it felt like opening a door to a room you didn't know existed inside you. Not because his voice was loud, but because it came from a place they didn't know they were missing. He became what the old man once was, not a teacher, not a preacher, but a presence. And every time someone asked him how to escape their trap, he would point not to the horizon, but to the dirt beneath their feet. It starts with one brick, but time has a way of testing all things, even resolve. As seasons passed, the man found himself no longer in silence, but in storms. There were days when the fire would not light, when his hands would tremble, and the axe would miss its mark, when words formed in his mouth, but died before reaching the page. The rituals he had once performed with clarity now felt heavy, repetitive, pointless, and in the valley below, he saw others, men who did not rise before the sun, men who did not carry burdens in silence, men who laughed louder, gained faster, rose quicker, or so it seemed. They built towers, not walls. They chased success, not stillness. They stood on stages, while he sat in the dirt. He told himself it didn't matter, but it did. Comparison crept in like a sickness, subtle, slow, corrosive. He began to wonder if he had wasted his time, if all this discipline was simply a more elegant form of delay, if perhaps he should stop. One morning, he stood before the wall and did nothing. No brick, no breath, just stillness. For the first time in years, he did not build. He sat in the cold and let doubt consume him. A younger man might have broken, and for a moment, he nearly did. But something stirred in the silence. Not a sound, not a word, just the memory of hands, laying a single brick. He remembered the old man, the smile that wasn't approval but understanding, the silence that wasn't emptiness, but trust. And he realized the pain wasn't punishment, it was passage. Not all days are for building, some are for bleeding, for breaking, for remembering why you began. So he did what he always did. He rose, he knelt, he laid one brick. It didn't feel glorious, it didn't look impressive, but it was enough. And the next day, he did it again. That is what most men never understand. They want greatness that is visible, but greatness begins in dust, in repetition, in choosing to rise when the ground feels heavier than your own bones. It begins when you build, while no one claps, and you do it anyway. One winter evening, the man sat by a fire he built with his own hands. The wind howled like a forgotten memory, and yet he was still. He remembered the town, the fountain, the faces, the smiles that hid surrender. He closed his eyes and whispered a prayer, not to any god, but to the man he used to be. Thank you for breaking, because that version of him. So if you're watching this, wondering if change is real, if discipline matters, if quiet mornings and slow rituals make any difference, let this story be your proof. Because the path doesn't begin with lightning or fire, it begins with stillness, with breath, with the quiet decision to return to the dirt and build. It begins with a decision to build, to return to the dirt, to stop chasing escape and start carving something worth becoming. It starts with one brick, every day, even now, because one day, someone will sit beside your fire, and what you've built in silence will become their light. The town of small things, not a prison, not a curse, a gift for the few who are ready to see it. And now, so are you. But the boy too would have his own winter. At first he built with joy, the first brick, the first sweat, the first quiet victories. They came easily, like sunlight on young leaves. But discipline, true discipline, is not built in light. It is forged in the shadows. As weeks passed, the boy's hands blistered, the cold bit harder. His questions grew louder. Why build if no one sees? Why rise if the world stays the same? One morning he stopped. He turned to the man, eyes filled with the weight of doubt. Does it ever get easier? The man stared into the fire. No, he said, but you get stronger. The boy clenched his fists. He wanted something more, a clearer reason, a reward, a guarantee. But there was none. That night he did not sleep. He wandered the hillside past the wall, past the wild, and he saw them again. The men who laughed, who ran, who sparkled in the noise. He felt small, insignificant, and he asked himself the same question all men eventually face. What if this isn't enough? The path of quiet strength does not offer applause. It offers something harder, becoming. At dawn, he returned. He didn't speak, just laid one brick, and beside him the man smiled. Not because the boy succeeded, but because he failed, and chose to begin again. Years passed, seasons turned. The wall stretched far across the hillside now, not to enclose but to mark the journey. Travelers began to arrive. Few stayed long. Most came with fire in their eyes and questions in their mouths. Where does this path lead? What's the reward at the end? The man said little, sometimes nothing, until one day a stranger arrived. He was different, sharp suit, sharper eyes, confidence like polished steel. He studied the wall, the tools, the fire. You've built all this? For what? He asked. The man didn't respond. You could have written books, given speeches, made millions. Instead, you've chosen silence. The man handed him a brick. Try it. The stranger frowned but humored him. He laid the brick, carelessly, uneven, loose. The man shook his head, adjusted it. This isn't about building a wall, he said. It's about becoming someone who builds. The stranger scoffed. That's poetic, but useless. Men need more. The man stared at him, not with anger, but with the quiet gaze of someone who no longer needed to be understood. Then go find more, he said. The stranger left that night. But years later, another wall began to rise, far away, in a different valley. And on the first brick, someone had carved a single word: remember. Because the men who build in silence become the architects of new worlds. Time moved without mercy. The man, now older, laid fewer bricks. His hands, once strong and unwavering, had grown slower, but his presence had not faded. In fact, it had deepened. He said even less. But when he did speak, boys who once mocked him now listened like disciples before a fire. The boy who once sat beside him, he was grown now, shoulders broad, gaze still. A man who did not need permission to act. He had begun his own wall, not far from the original, not to copy it, but to echo it. The old man watched him one morning, as the younger builder guided a small group, each one laying a brick, sweating, failing, adjusting, rising. He smiled, then turned and walked into the woods. No one followed, no one needed to, because his job was done. Not the wall, not the path, but the flame, now burning in others. And in that silence, he vanished. Some say he died, others say he became the wind. But the boy, now a man, said this when asked. He became what all men must one day become, a myth forged from discipline, a memory built one brick at a time, a legend no longer seeking credit, only continuity. And every year when the frost came early and the fire felt harder to light, the builders would gather near the first stone. They'd touch the wall, lay their hands on its rough edge, and whisper, "We build because he did, we stay because he stayed, we rise because he never fell, only faded into what mattered." Years passed. The wall became more than stone. It became scripture, a living testament to quiet strength. It stretched like a spine through the valley, each section laid by hands that once trembled, now firm. Every year, when winter's first wind howled down the hills, the builders gathered, not to mourn, but to remember. They brought no flags, no drums, just a single candle each placed along the wall. And when the last flame was lit, the valley would glow, not with fire, but with memory. Children would ask, as children do, "Who built this?" And the builders would answer, "No one," and everyone, because it was never about one man. It was about what one man chose to become. And far beyond the valley, in other forgotten corners of the world, new walls rose, quietly, slowly, without hashtags, without praise, just men doing the work. And so the myth grew, not in noise but in ritual, not in fame but in firelight. And it was said, in hushed tones by those who understood, In every town of small things, a builder waits, a man without applause, a fire without crowd, a wall that rises when no one is watching. And if you ever feel the ache of stagnation, the loop that kills men softly, you need not scream. You only need to kneel, to breathe, to build, because one day, another boy will ask you, who started this? And you'll say, no one, and everyone. But today, it's my turn. And under the very first stone, the one the old man laid when the valley was still empty, they discovered a message. It wasn't written in ink. It was carved with care, faint but deliberate. 3 lines. I do not build to be seen. I do not rise to be praised. I do this because I must. No signature, no date, just truth. And now, every boy who begins with a brick is told of the hidden words beneath their feet. They don't visit the message. They don't display it. They live it. And in time, they leave their own. Because this town of small things isn't small at all. It's sacred. And the walls that rise here, they aren't built to keep men in. They're built to keep truth alive. Decades later, the valley looks different. The walls stretch far, some curved, some jagged, some smooth with time. Not perfect, but strong, beautiful in their simplicity. Children play among the stones. Young men build, older men guide. The fire is never allowed to die. No one remembers the old man's name now, but they remember his hands, the way he moved, the way he listened, the way he laid one brick, then another, then another. They speak of him like a story told around the fire, not to glorify him, but to remind themselves who they could become. One evening, a boy, barely taller than the shovel he held, sat beside the wall and asked, "Will anyone remember me?" A man, weathered, quiet, replied, "They won't need to. The wall will. Because legacy isn't memory, it's movement, it's stone, it's fire passed hand to hand without applause." And in the distance, under a violet sky, another boy kneels. He breathes, he steadies his grip, he places his first brick, and the story begins again.